Hey guys, it's me, Miss Watson, and I'm going to be reading to you chapter 15 in the Humvee. Now, I'll warn you, there's a few hard words in here, so I might stumble. So please forgive me if I kind of mess them up a little bit, but I'll try to do my best. So let's go ahead and get started. Wolf and Laurel drove for more than 12 hours straight before getting stuck in the middle of a river. Laurel stood on the Humvee's roof, keeping an eye out for crocodiles, while Wolf waited to the other side with the winch cable over his shoulder. He hooked it around a stout tree and gave Laurel a thumbs up. She engaged the winch, and the Humvee inched its way to the opposite bank. That wasn't so bad. Wolf wiped the mud from his face and began feeding the cable back onto the winch spool. If I recall, we have 3 more rivers to cross before we get to the Loboco village. We should be there by tomorrow afternoon. 4 more rivers, Laurel corrected. And you'd better let me drive. You haven't slept all night. All right, Wolf said, climbing into the passenger seat. But I'm not sure I'll be able to sleep. Marty has things under control. He's only 13. Laurel eased the Humvee up the steep bank and managed to find the road, which was little more than a rutted, slippery scar cut through the dense green. A very resourceful and resilient 13, she said. I've never seen anyone recover from hypothermia and a near drowning faster than Marty did at the lake. He shook it off like a cold shower. He's tough, Wolf said, but little Grace isn't made the same. She doesn't like to be called Little Grace, Laurel corrected gently. And I wouldn't be so sure about what she's made of. She's every bit as tough as Marty, but in a different way. You might be right, Wolf admitted. She did seem to be in pretty good spirits when we talked to her last night. A few bumpy miles passed in silence. Then Laurel said, If you're determined to stay awake, you might as well talk to me so that I don't fall asleep. Tell me how Dr. Travis Wolf became a cryptid hunter. Wolf continued staring through the windshield. In a roundabout way, my father was responsible. He was a big game hunter. You mean as in lions, tigers, and bears? Oh my, Wolf laughed mirthlessly. And many other animals as well. I spent most of my childhood in the field, helping him pursue his trophies. He sounds uncomfortably like Noah Blackwood. He should. Blackwood and my father knew each other. In fact, they were members of the same club. Laurel glanced at him in surprise. What club? A very exclusive club. So secret it doesn't have a name. And I couldn't tell you for sure how many people are in it or who they are. The club still exists? Wolf nodded. My father took me to one of the meetings when I was 17 years old. And that's where I met Noah Blackwood for the first time. It was at the Seattle Ark. Back then, the club was made up mostly of trophy hunters, like my father. They got together once a year to talk about their hunts and complain about how the environmentalists were ruining things for them. In my father's defense, just before he died, he had a change of heart about all this. He could see what was happening to the animals and places he loved, and he didn't like it. How far back did Noah and your father's friendship go? Years. But they had a falling out after Blackwood showed up at one of the meetings with a thylacine. A Tasmanian wolf? Laurel was shocked. Alive? Barely, Wolf said. But I thought the last Tasmanian wolf was killed 60 years ago. So did everybody else. I wasn't there, but apparently it caused quite a stir. The animal didn't live long enough for Blackwood to put it on public display, but it sure whetted the club members' appetites. There was a shift in their attitudes. They lost interest in big trophy animals and began hunting endangered animals instead. Size no longer mattered. They liked their meat rare. My father and some of the other old timers dropped out. After this, the club became even more secretive because some of the animals they were hunting were protected. Not all of them? Laurel asked. Wolf shook his head. You can't protect something that isn't supposed to exist. People might get upset if you shot a Bigfoot, but in most places, it isn't against the law. This is one of the reasons I'm searching for cryptids. Proving that a cryptid exists is the first step toward getting legal protection for it. But Blackwood took it a step further. He realized that the trophies were worth more alive than dead. He started sending out bounty hunters with tranquilizer darts instead of bullets. When the animal dies, Blackwood gets the skin anyway, so why not make money while it's still breathing? People will stand in line for hours and pay just about anything to get a glimpse of something strange or rare. He's made millions on the animals he's collected before, putting them in his private dioramas. Laurel shook her head in dismay. So the public pays for his collecting. They pay for a lot more than that. I can't prove it, but I think he's trying to clone animals. He might even be trying to make new animal species. Is that possible? Laurel asked. Most people don't think so, Wolf admitted, but I'm not so sure. Have you ever heard of El Chupacabra, the so-called goat sucker of Puerto Rico and Mexico? I thought that was a hoax. I've looked at the evidence, and some of it's pretty convincing, Wolf said. But if the chupacabra exists, it's not like any animal that's ever preceded it, which makes me suspect that it was manufactured in a laboratory. But why? The answer is simple: money. People would line up for miles to see something like that. I wouldn't put it past him to make a chupacabra in his lab, then let it go for a while to build the myth, then recapture it and put it on display in one of his arks. I'm all for scientific advances, but I'm afraid that the breakthroughs are coming so fast, we haven't had time to consider the moral and environmental consequences of our cleverness. The egg you sent to them wouldn't have enough DNA to work with, but if Blackwood could get his hands on a fresh egg or fresh sauropod tissue, who knows what he could do with it? With the DNA, he might be able to clone a sauropod for each of his 6 parks, and Mokalimbe doesn't have to be alive for him to use its DNA. A bit of flesh might do the job. I don't understand how you could have worked for him, Laurel said. It couldn't have been for money alone. You don't seem the type. There was another reason, Wolf said. A very important reason. He stared out the windshield in silence for another half-mile before turning back to Laurel. At 17, I wasn't that interested in the club. A bunch of old guys sitting around smoking cigars, talking about their hunting conquests, wasn't my idea of a stimulating vacation. I loved my father and the chase, but for me, getting close to the animal was enough, which was a big disappointment to my father. Anyway, I spent the 3 days we were at Noah's Ark wandering around the exhibits, talking to the keepers. During one of my rounds, I met a beautiful girl, and my life has never been the same. Well, that was chapter 15. Make sure to come back for chapter 16. Hope you enjoyed that. So, see you soon.